Hi, I'm Kayte Sabicer, and today I'd like to talk to you about my process for baking. So, a little bit about me. I am a professional model maker, painter, fabricator. I did quite a bit in Los Angeles for a while, doing visual effects miniatures for films. So you can see some of the movies I worked on up there. Then when I moved to the Bay Area, I got more into stop motion. So now I'm a puppet fabricator, set fabricator, doing stuff for stop motion. Some of the bigger things, Inception, Dark Knight Rises, obviously Mad God is one of my favorites. Lesser known, but I was thrilled to be able to work in the Star Wars universe, which I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. Ask me about my Star Wars tattoos. Tomorrow is holiday, if you all. So that's where I am. Aside from that, I am also a contributor to Kayte Sabicer's Tested. So I have a show on there called Model a Year where I teach model making tips and tricks on YouTube. We've also started a second channel called Tested Team that features a lot more of the rest of the crew. That's not just Adam with his iPhone in his shop doing his stuff. And I help him out on just personal builds that he has that he wants a little hand. Now, I'm sure everyone in this room has done some kind of making at some point, whether it was, your science fair poster board, you baked a cake, or, a model kit, or like me, maybe you've worked on a accurate replica of an Apollo space panel, as people do. And what does that making process look like for you? In an ideal world, that would be ideate, create, complete. And if you are one of those people who it is so easy for, I'll say what I really think and just say congratulations. It must be nice, because it's not that easy for a lot of us, and including myself. I find that in real life, it works a little bit different. Either you can't get that initial spark of an idea to begin with, so you just sit there and you're like, I don't know what to make. Or you have 50 ideas and you don't know how to pick one and you can't commit and there's too many choices and you just get frozen. Or you have the perfect one, you know exactly what you want to do, but you have no idea how to start, or you've started it and you have no idea how to finish. And so you end up with either nothing or a million half-finished projects, which I'm guilty in both of those, is for sure. I can't tell you how many project ideas I've come up with, and I'll get talking with somebody and I'll tell them all about it. That's a great idea, and then I won't see them for a year. And then I see them in a year and they're like, oh, tell me all about it. How did this project end up going? And I'm like, awesome. I don't know how to tell you that I have still not started it, or I'm no further along than I was when I first brought it up before. And it's embarrassing. I don't feel like any excuse I have is good enough as to why I haven't made progress on it. And, I would love to have the excuse, you know what, I was really chugging along, I made, I was getting really far. I don't know, like this bird came in and took it, and, not my fault. I can't complain. What are you gonna do? But the truth is, it's me. It's my brain, and I'm finding out more that it's how some other people's brains are too. Again, you feel like it should be so easy. You have an idea and you execute on that idea, but there can be this friction in there. I get caught in a feedback loop in my head. I think too much, I worry too much, and I need everything to be perfect. So why start if I don't know what it's gonna look like in the end? Or if I can't make it look like exactly what I wanted it to, then I just don't do it. I sometimes get stuck in, maybe I don't have the exact right knowledge or equipment for it. And that's where I'll just walk away and leave it there. I get so caught up in the anxiety of the process that I'm left with nothing. But I've got a trick. If you want to make something, I'll say this. I can't say this has solved all my problems. I will say it's helped me, and the people I've talked to say it's helped them. So, if you want to make something, It's revolutionary. Make something. When I'm feeling stuck, I get out some supplies. Maybe I decide I should work on a craft, something very non-intimidating, or I ask my friend if they need help with the project that they're doing. Or better yet, I ask for a group hang where a bunch of people are lasers together. For crafting, that one's my go-to. I've been doing it since I was a child. Whenever I would get filled with nervous energy, I would just get to work. Give me hot glue and felt and cardboard and glitter glue, and I'm happy. And you know why? It's because it's all bonus. You know, if you end your crafting session with something that you're really proud of, amazing. That's a huge win. But if you don't, what have you lost? This was just a silly little crafting session to pass the time. So this is my favorite method because there's nothing at stake. You're not worried about wasting the materials. Maybe it's something that you got at your local reuse store or at the discount store, or better yet, something you already had lying around. We all have piles of junk or supplies or things we bought that we're like, we'll use that for something later. You'll be surprised at the idea that come to you when you're just mindlessly cutting up cardboard and watching your favorite movie in the background. Now, helping a friend is a step up. You know, there are some skills required, right? You don't want to bungle a project for somebody else when all you wanted to do was help them. But it takes the pressure off of you. You didn't have to pick that project. They did that work for you. You don't even have to pick your task. They're going to delegate something for you. You have an assignment. And I feel the best when I'm feeling productive and helpful. So this is such a lovely way to spend time with somebody that you like to hang out with while also being useful. The act of working just jumpstarts your creativity and gets your juices flowing. So that's one that I really like to go to. Now, a maker hang are probably the most effective at getting me into gear for my projects. I found this is the absolute best cure when I stall out. First of all, I'll say I hope that you have a good community of makers. If you don't, look around this room. There are other people here who care about the same things as you, or this entire fair, right? This is a place for like-minded people to come. So please find other people that share a little bit of that spark that you have. I do a monthly stitch and bitch with my friends, my girlfriends. I'll get together, we'll do crochet or dazzling or embroidery. That one, we're not trying to actually accomplish some big project. We all just want something to work on together. But if I'm really feeling it, I rally the troops. I send out a message to my Discord of fellow makers. I say, let's all get together. You know, I'll order us some food. We're all going to hang out, bring something to work on, large or small, and we can all just tinker while we hang. And I find that the thing that's most helpful for me is the talking that happens while we're in the room together. So it's me being honest and saying, oh, you know, I'm working on this project, but I'm just really stuck on this thing, or I can't wrap my head around this, or why can't I push through? And I'm sure that you all have experienced this too. When I get stuck on something, it's different than when my friend gets stuck on it. When I see them having troubles, I can very clearly say, you know what you should do? Here's some advice. And I can offer them helpful tips. But when it's myself, you're too in it. You can't see that. So I love getting that outside feedback from people who don't have as much at stake as you do. And so it really helps to let me work through a problem, but then also I find that I end up with accountability buddies. That one's important to me. I need somebody to do check-ins with me to help keep me on track. So after spending a few hours working side by side with some of the most creative people I know, I can't tell you the difference it makes. I might have made some actual progress on the physical thing I was working on because of, you know, cutting out that time and being there doing it, but really it's the motivation I come away with that helps. I find myself going back to my shop with new determination. I try new things. Maybe I get off my butt, finally order those supplies I've been waiting on. And I set up weekly check-ins to guilt myself into keeping up. No one wants the shame of having asked for help and then squandering that chance. So I need that fear to motivate me. I go, okay, I'm checking with Mel on Tuesday, and they're going to be miles ahead on what they're doing because they are so prolific. And so I'm going to work my butt off to make sure that I have something to show for it. And in that moment, you can use the excuse of like, I want to make them proud, but really you're making yourself proud by like pushing yourself forward. I liken some of these exercises to cooking. If you have a really fancy recipe that you've always wanted to try, but you're daunted by the fact that it's complex, you might be too intimidated to actually try it. You think there's no way I can execute this. But if you start doing smaller dishes first, without the pressure, you learn and grow. You might say, I can't make a souffle, but I could try a bechamel sauce for some mac and cheese for myself, because I'm not going to disappoint anybody but me with that mac and cheese. Or I know how to do the egg whites already because I made an angel food cake for my mom one time. And so you start tackling the smaller aspects of it, and pretty soon you have enough that, oh, okay, well, actually, I know this component, and I know this component, and I know this component. Maybe now I have no confidence, and I could actually try the big thing. Now, the first place I got a lesson in letting go was when I started working with Tippett, who's a stop motion and visual effects legend. I started working with him about 13 years ago. He has a couple Oscars for Star Wars and Jurassic Park, and he's got serious talent and unending creative vision. I was pretty intimidated at first. Not only was he very skilled, but he never seems to have any of the same struggles that I do. He thinks of an idea and he makes it real. He doesn't overthink it. He dives right in. He had a 30-year-long running animated project called Mad God. And it wasn't 30 years long because he couldn't finish it. It was 30 years long because he always had more to add. And while I've worked on a number of impressive movies in my career, I think that Mad God is my favorite and always will be. It's something that I have been honored just to be in the room for, let alone be a pretty active member of for 10 years. That one's finally finished by now. Okay. I'm a little bit sad. I wasn't ready for it to end. But the thing about Phil is he has no time for nonsense. No time for hesitation. He respects artists and people who get things done. You don't sit and chit chat and second guess yourself. You come in and you create. But my problem is I've always second guessed myself. Even on big projects where I've been hired, I sit there thinking, you know, I'm sure somebody else could think of a better way to do this. They might have a better idea than me. But that doesn't fly at Tippett Studio. You're in the room, you have the talent, so use it or get out. Phil had a habit of giving you the most minimal direction possible and seeing what you did with it. He always said that the genius of George Lucas on the original Star Wars movies was that he gathered the best collection of artists that he could find and then got out of their way. So that made Phil thrive, and he's been trying to recreate that environment. But for me, someone who always considered myself just a pair of hands that could follow directions really well, this was terrifying. So imagine having a living legend come up to you and say, make a table, and then walking away. I do love stammering. What size? How many legs? Like, what style? And I would just like, I'd be like, oh my god, I'm gonna die. There's too many possibilities. Day after day, I would get vague directions and be in agony, like questioning all of my decisions. I'd feel insecure and embarrassed how long it took me, and then I compare my work to his, and it was kind of rough. But the more we got to know each other, eat lunch together every day, I saw how his brain worked, and it all started to make sense to me. He told me he struggles with mental health sometimes. His brain would fill with anxiety and everything would get too loud, and I couldn't believe it because I had those exact same feelings. But he said early on he learned that if he's making, that all gets quiet. He wasn't prolific because he was so carefree and full of ideas. He kept making because it kept him going. So he forced himself to make. His quieted mind would then open up to more ideas for more projects, and he let it flow out of him. The making wasn't a source of anguish like I'd let it become for me. It was his solace from anguish, like it had once been for me. Pretty quickly, I found my groove alongside him. We could sit in silence for hours just making crops and sets, and it was so peaceful. I stopped questioning what I was going to make or how I was going to make it. I just let it happen. I'd grab what was closest to me. I'd spontaneously act on an idea that popped into my head. And I'd remind myself that it doesn't have to be perfect, especially a stop motion animated project. It was going to be in the background. It was going to be dark. There was going to be, atmosphere around it. So it just needed to work for the millisecond that it was on screen. So don't sit there and kill yourself over it. And pretty soon I felt the solace. I felt the confidence come back. Now, obviously that was a job where there were more parameters of how something needed to look. If you've ever seen that, it was a very definite style. Pretty much everything's covered in an umber wash. Lots of rust, lots of kind of gore and blood and all of that. But when I have more creative freedom, and I'm the one calling the shots, I like to consider it doodling. I find a way to let my creativity out and my skills grow where no one has any expectations of me and there's no wrong answer. I find myself doing this a lot on smaller jobs. So last year I was working with my good friend Jen Shafter as she art directed Open Sauce, which is a con in San Francisco. She commissioned my partner Mel and I to create some art pieces that we're gonna set dress all around the con. We had one big build, but we had a lot of little builds. And I used the small pieces as a way to workshop some of my ideas so that then I would have more skills when I went to the next thing. So here you can see some documentary frogs right there. Our friend Lee graciously took on the printing and we just needed to get them painted. There was an area called the Damp Jungle Cantina, and so we were making a few animals that stuck to there. And this created the perfect environment that I mentioned before about gathering fellow creative people around and just letting like a boom flow of ideas and progress happen. So there's a group of us all hanging out together. Each person took a frog and some paint pens, and we sat around. And this one, I'll say, is a little different than, say, what I did with Phil, where you shut up and worked. This one, you totally open your mind. So you were just sitting there chatting. Everybody had something to say. Everybody had paint pens in their hand. And we never had a predetermined, here's how it should look, here's the colors you should use. You saw what happened when you weren't thinking. Everybody kind of did their own interpretation of how it should look. Here's one of them. And there was something so freeing about it. Normally I freeze up, oh, there's too many possibilities. But when you're chatting with somebody, you're just mindlessly reaching for whatever's in front of you. It all just happens. And I'm really happy with how they all turned out. You wouldn't know that 4 different people made 4 different frogs because they looked pretty cohesive. It helped us establish some color combos and some techniques and test out the viability of these acrylic paint pens that I had gotten, which we could then use on the bigger project we had. So here is that larger project. It was a coin-operated horsey ride that the one time lived outside a grocery store in California. Looks a little different now than the race, but it still works. And you can see that there are some beautiful paint pen details on the saddle here and on the hooves. This is actually a really great example of what Jen likes to say is trusting the process, not the plan. Actually, she made a tested t-shirt that said that I had a lot of fun wearing while I was pregnant and like watching people like look at me a little bit weird as the arrows like pointing from my belly. So we originally had an entire paint scheme picked out for this horse. And all we needed to do was sand it down so that we could get to putting the paint on. But as soon as we started sanding, we found this beautiful 4-dye pattern. So this is right after we started sanding. And like the incredible layers and layers and layers of past paint jobs on there came out in this beautiful psychedelic crazy mess. And so we instantly were like, well, that's it right there. We're not gonna just like ignore this and prime over it and do something else. Like, we're gonna let this speak to us. The vision laid itself out in front of us and we ran with it. I was really happy about that. That one was on display last year at Open Source. I think it's gonna be there again this year, if you want to see it. All right, another example I can give you falls under the category of mock-ups. I'm sure some of you have started a big project in the past and decided to do a mock-up to work out some of the general ideas first. In this case, I was working on a short film with my partner Mal on an animatronic robot that worked in a fast food drive-thru, you know, as you do. It was like the main character in this short film, and it was like in the future, the fully autonomous robot takes your order and then like the food comes out of its stomach. Mel was designing the look and function of the robot, and we were working with the director to nail down exactly what it needed to do and how it should look. But at some point, it all got a little convoluted, and both sides were having a hard time like finding a common vision or understanding everything correctly. So one day, about an hour before we had a scheduled Zoom call with the team, I was like, you know, it would really help us for scale if I just had like a block of foam that I could hold up next to me that was the right size, so that they could see, because it was a big question that kept coming up. How is it compared to a human? And so, of course, I go into my shop, I cut out a few blocks of foam, glue them together. Okay, this is about the right size. And I'm like, I still have a lot of time left. I mean, maybe I could just sand it a little bit. And that, of course, turned into a much bigger process than I had intended. So then I sanded it to match the 3D drawings we already had. And I was like, well, it's the right shape, but I think they need a little bit more information than that. So then I started adding more details on shapes. And then I was like, well, they need to know the color scheme. So then I started adding paint, and I was like, well, if I'm this far, I still have like 15 minutes left. So I started adding foam strips so they could see all of the details around here. I had some printouts of the like original face, so I just cut out from the paper this mouth. I added a foam strip detail around there. I had this plastered Ridley like in my shop that worked so well. I could not have planned that any better. And at some point I looked down at my watch and I was like, oh, the meeting is now. So I hop on the call and I'm like giddily sitting there like feeling like a little kid waiting for show and tell. And finally the director says something about, well, I just need to know what it looks like next to a person. And I was like, I have something for this. So I just kind of casually like pulled it into frame, and instantly everybody on the call was like, oh wow. And it really helped sell exactly what it was that we were describing. You know, it didn't matter that there's rough foam texture here, that you can see the seam lines between the layers. It sold what it was right away, and it did exactly what it needed to. And I think that it really helped sell it really well. If I had tried to do this, just like if somebody had said, make your mock-up and bring it to us, I really would have agonized about it. I think that I would have tried too hard to make it too perfect. But because this was a spur-of-the-moment thing that was all bonus, I was able to sit back and just say, all right, let's see what we can do. Everything of it is, nobody expects anything from you. So any aspect that I add to it is just gonna make it look better and better and better, and it made me happier. So we actually finished the job with like a really nice looking, fully working animatronic robot made with a bread box in the middle. And the crew was happy. It worked exactly how it needed to. It had a fully functioning robotic arm that could grab things. The head was fully movable. The eye came in and out. The light flashed. But of the whole project, like, this is what gave me the most joy making. Like, this is the thing that I came away with so happy. And it was all because I spurred the moment, did something with no expectations, and I just no rest. But I just let myself have some fun with it. So sometimes that allows you to have the joy that you need. Now, one last thing I'll mention is something I discovered recently at a preschool event for my toddler. They have these parent meetings where you learn important subjects for your job as a parent. They talk to you about how to deal with hard questions your kid might ask you, or how to explain why this neurodivergent friend hits when they get upset and how we have to deal with that. But this meeting was a little different. It was an art night, and there were stations for paint and glue and collage, and these were the kind of stations that I've seen our kids play with throughout the year. So I show up and I'm like, I don't want to brag, but whatever this is, I'm gonna crush it. These other parents don't know what they're in for. Like, I'm gonna really rock this one. But really, it wasn't about that. It was a lesson in process. When your kid comes home with art that they've made, your instinct is to say, it's beautiful, what is it? Or tell me about it. And really, this was teaching us that that's not how a 3-year-old's brain works. Your 3-year-old walks in and sees a pile of fun materials that they can have fun with. And so they're not thinking about what the end goal is. They don't start out with something in their head. They're not trying to get somewhere. There's no measure of success for them except having fun in that moment. It was the process that told them how to listen to their creative instincts. And I actually made friends with the fellow parents that night, and he shared something with me that he gave me permission to retell this. And I found it really touching. He said, I really struggle with art. I've always been told I wasn't any good at it, so art to me wasn't fun. It scared me because I knew I couldn't make something pretty at the end, so why try? But tonight, I got to let go and enjoy this process. I drew random shapes with random colors, and I glued this thing to that thing for no reason at all. I felt amazing. I feel accomplished, even though I have nothing to show for it but some mess that looks sloppier than my toddler's. And I think that's the real lesson here. We all get caught up in the end result and forget that making is the part that brings us the joy. The creativity happens in the moment, not in the planning. The satisfaction we get should not stem from what you end up with, but from what you accomplished by being there and having taken the time to do it in the first place. So my advice to you is this: if you are privileged enough to have the tools and the time to make something, make some. I don't care what. And guess what? No one else does too. This is not a place for judgment. Make what you want to make. Go as big or as small as the moment warrants. Build Frankenstein's lab from Lego. Recreate your entire breakfast meal in felt. Wire your house with lights so that every time you flush the toilet, a disco show happens. Or glue some cardboard to some other cardboard and put some glitter glue on it. You're going to surprise yourself with the sheer unending creativity that comes out of you, and anyone who's lucky enough to see whatever it is you've made is going to love it because they're going to see how happy that made you. So, thank you all for listening to me ramble about my dreams. If you have any questions, I'd love to chat. Also, if here's some of my contact info, if you ever want to chat in the future, I'd love to hear from you. You have any questions? Yeah?
When you get to the technical part of the meeting,
Yeah.
if you don't have the information, how do you find it
So,
or get it?
number one, I love YouTube. The chances are somebody has already done what you want to do. Like, seriously, 50 people have done it probably. So I look for those resources. But actually, my number one call is usually to my friends. because I do have a pretty good network of people that I know, I send out the call, just like that on my Discord, and I go, all right, I don't know what to do here. Anybody have any experience in this? And somebody might respond with, I don't, but I think I know someone who does. And so then it became like a bit of a chain to find you who you need. But yeah, the simple act of Googling or looking up something in Make, basically there's always something there. And then a lot of times I'll split off and do a side quest. So if it does involve a new skill, I'll pause the big job and I'll find something little that I can do with that, so that as I'm learning, it's much lower stakes. Again, right?
Sure.
You know, do something small, figure out you can do it first, then go back to your big job.
Can you talk about the role maybe that education played, could play, might play for, I mean, you know, you'd be wonderful or creative work. I'd love to see more kids be able to do that.
Yeah.
In my experience, they don't get exposure to that. They get it in preschool.
Yes.
Right. And then and part of it, I just want there to kids as they begin to feel the judgment of their peers, stop being creative.
Yeah.
So schools don't do a good job of creating an environment which they're free to make something.
Yeah, I think that that is completely true. As soon as you start to feel that fear of failure or of being ostracized at school, you're like, you shut it away. So I'd rather make nothing than make something that gets made fun of, or I'm gonna make in secret and not show anybody. I am an unusual case. I actually went to a specialty fine arts junior high and high school. And so not only was it encouraged for us to make, it was required. You had to take classes in a number of different subjects, and you had to do critiques. And I think that's part of the reason why I was able to push through some things, was because whether I wanted to or not, I was gonna get roasted in front of everybody. I was gonna have to stand up there and own whatever it was I did, and I gotta listen to whoever it was say their 2 cents on what I had in front of me. So I a little bit had like trial by fire there, where I just had to accept all of it and get over it. But I think that education really did play a big part for me, because it was there that I was encouraged to step outside the box. I was encouraged to try new things. I would do like a multimedia project, and they're like, oh, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, just go for it. Let's try a special project there. And so I was very encouraged by my educators and by my classmates, because we were also like-minded. I will say I transferred high schools halfway through, and I was really disappointed at what we had available to us, and I found myself trying to change. I would be like talking to the teachers, talking to the administrators, being like, why don't you offer more things here? Why aren't you encouraging people to be more creative and make? And luckily, you know, they started coming up with some programs where they would teach kids engineering programs, and then they would get them internships with the state, with, I don't know what you could call it here. We have Caltrans. So it's like our road infrastructure department. Or they would teach them technical knowledge and coding, and then get them internships at Apple. I was in the media department, so I got an internship at my local television station. And so it really started to help people find their path and then get the experience that they needed. But yeah, I really wish that it was more common, that you could just be presented with the opportunity to allow those ideas to flow without so much judgment behind them.
I'm a teacher, and I'm actually an art teacher and a robotics teacher. But part of the problem with the education system that we have here in the States is that an end goal is expected. And to just freely make without having a final product is unheard of, pretty much, you know?
See, that to me makes me feel like the curriculum should entail, okay, right now we're going to be doing an ideating section in class. Yeah. So during this, you're going to have to come up with 4 different ideas. Whether they fail or succeed is not really the goal of it. It's
Right.
that you're trying out, you're workshopping, and you're brainstorming. Yeah, it feels like it would be nice if they're like, okay, here is a chunk of time that's just for exploring.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I taught at a summer camp where I did art for kids, and they used this thing called the innovator's mindset. And so we had this whole thing where it would be like, come up with an idea. It's like a little bit based on the scientific process, right?
Right.
You try it out. You see what's going to work, what's not going to work, and then you might need to go back to the beginning before it can come to a complete project. But it really encouraged kids to do that.
Do you have anything where you're like, you do like a big creative thing, and then like at the end, but you're like, I just need to be dumb and not be creative? Like I call it decompressing.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I'm playing a big dumb video game and not thinking it all right now.
I definitely find that, like, I'll get to the point. I actually miss my old job where I would do the miniatures for visual effects, because at the end of the job where you like hate the thing that you've been working on, you get to blow it up. Like, do you know what kind of like amazing catharsis that is? Where you're like, yes, burn, but burn in the right way. I don't want to feel it again. Yeah, I definitely get that, where I'm like, okay, and I struggle with like, you know, sensory issues and being overstimulated, so I definitely need to put up a wall. Unfortunately, I also have an overactive mind, so I can't sit still. So one of my go-tos is actually knitting and crochet. I can sit on a couch. I am literally like, there's almost like a running count in your head, so that keeps part of my brain busy, and then I can have something on TV. But I still feel productive, so there's none of that guilt of like, no, I'm just sitting here being lazy. Maybe it's a blanket for somebody, so I get to feel good that it's for somebody else, but I don't have to think. I'm following a pattern, and it keeps my brain occupied enough, but not like exhausting the creative part of me that, you know, I've been using for the rest of the time. If anybody struggles with like anxiety or too much brain, I will say knitting and crochet is incredible. I had a doctor tell me one time that the part of your brain that worries cannot work while you are doing that action because of like what it requires of you or something like that. I was like, I mean, sure, I guess there's science there, but I know that when I'm in it, I feel like, you know that feeling when you go to cut wrapping paper and it just glides? That's what it feels like. It just, everything goes smooth. I love it. Anything else? Yeah.
Just a plug. So we had okay, so here's talking about the robot also. So we talk about real quick, see that robot in action? The movie they said was on.
Yeah. So the movie is called Neon Vowels. I believe it's mostly online for, you know, on demand. It's a short film. It's been in a few festivals going around. And actually I have here, if you see it, mkultra.industries, that feels like a weird thing to say, but that's the website. If you type in mkultra.industries, that's our website. So Mel and I are creative partners, and that's our company name. And we make just kind of crazy creatures and robots and animatronics. Mel is a amazing roboticist and engineer. They are the tech brain side of things, whereas I'm like the fabrication and the artistic side. So we mesh up pretty well because, you know, as much as I wish that I could engineer something, I still struggle with 3D modeling, anything too technical, just that part of my brain don't work so bad. But if I can touch it with my hands, I can make it look like anything you want. I just have to hold it in my hands. Like I can sculpt you something here, but I can't do it like this. I don't know.
You ever get into a project, you know, say 2 weeks in, and you're 3/4 done, and you go, there's a simpler way, and scrap that. I find scrapping what you've already invested time in incredibly difficult to do. It takes external.
Yes. In knitting and crochet, we call that frogging. So say you've got all these rows done, and you look down at the bottom and you see that you've missed one. And I'm not very good at repairing, or you've like counted the wrong thing, whatever it is, the solution is to start pulling, and you have to unravel all the way back. Sometimes you can't save any of it, you just have to start over. And that killed me. When I first started to do that, I've done it on a number of projects. I've even had projects that I've finished for, say, like movies, and then they go, actually, we're gonna cut that scene, or we just don't, we're gonna change the whole look of it, so throw that one away, we're gonna start again. And I think, again, like in high school where I had to learn to accept all the criticism at once and deal with it, it was a big lesson in learning to let go. Something that Phil always talks about is the impermanence of things. He's not sentimental about anything. He will sell some of his old props. He's like, I made it, it served its purpose, and now I'm moving on. And so to him, that means that nothing is very precious. Even though we look at it and see, this is my time, this is my anguish, this is all the materials I put into it, this is a huge waste, and it's gonna kill me to walk away from this. Again, going back to that innovator's mindset, and you know, some people talk about Adam Savage, and people quote him as saying, you know, fail better. In conversation, he actually says, I don't actually like that term. He says, because it's not a failure. Failure is when you walk away and you don't like try again. But if you're gonna keep going, then that's not failing. That's just part of the process. That's part of the innovator's mindset. You've hit your snag. You realize I was going in the wrong direction. So you can mourn a little bit for that time and that energy you've lost. But I don't know, I always find myself more invigorated when it's like, I call it like a cracked hippocampus. I'm like, I know how to do it now. That sucks, but I'm gonna keep that aside as my prototype. That was version 1. Let's start with version 2 now, you know? So it is a little bit of that Buddhist letting go of attachment space. You gotta be willing to walk away, you gotta be willing to blow it up.
But
Hopefully you end up better than where you started.
even realizing that in that time you learned something.
100%.
right? So it's not a waste.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is all part of the scientific method. It's like,
Right.
okay, I've gone to here, and guess what? When you do it the second time, you're gonna be a little bit faster. You're gonna be a little bit cleaner. Like, it's gonna come out a little bit better.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.